Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new and amazing Cerebral Book Chat. It is a Christmas edition. So, another Christmas edition because I happened across this wonderful book which I did not know about. Um, I knew about the movie, and then I knew about the new movie. But I didn't know that it was actually based off a book. So that was fascinating. So they brought it in. I've never seen it before. But I guess they brought it into, like I said, the local bookstore in my little mall that we have, here in British Columbia. So I wanted to share that with you. Perhaps you guys have seen the movie. It's called Miracle on 34th Street. And there's two movies. There's the newer movie, and then there's quite an old one. Oh gosh, was it 1950, 1948? I don't know, really old. And then there's a newer one that I think came out in the 90s, maybe the 2000s, maybe a long time ago, a good 20, 25 years. Anyway, so there was a couple of them, both of them very, very well done, although I think I like the original one better. But it was actually based on a book. Isn't that interesting? Boom. Look at this. Miracle on 34th Street by a woman, I think it's a woman, named Valentine Davies. And that's the back. What an interesting thing. It was on sale too. Yeah, they had a book, and it was actually in the bookstore. Like I said, I think it was Kohl's bookstore. And so I thought, man, this would be great for our cerebral book chat because it's just such a wonderful story. If you haven't seen it, it's basically, to give you a bit of an idea, a story of a man who shows up, right? It's sort of Macy's. Macy's is a very fancy department store, which does still exist. And as the Americans just had their Thanksgiving, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade is a very big deal for the whole country, I think. And I know I used to watch it too sometimes. I thought it was pretty. And of course, their Thanksgiving leads right to Christmas, whereas ours leads right to Halloween. So it's a very different kind of Thanksgiving, isn't it? Very, very sort of different, right? So that's why something I thought would be very cool to talk about a little bit because it's really one of the best movies if you want to have like a Christmas movie. It's sort of got this beautiful vibe about it, which I really like. And we had the ugly sweater day at my college today. So this is my ugly sweater. It's a little bit of Grinch. And it was so lovely. And, a few people actually were able to do that with me, and we had fun. And I ended up getting my photo on our website. Well, kind of our Facebook page, which, kind of comes a little bit from the website. So that's kind of fun. So I was on our Facebook page with other people also sporting their lovely, ugly Christmas sweaters. It was a beautiful thing. Moving on up in the world. So I thought, I'm waiting for my Amazon replacement Christmas lights, because I put up lights this year. And so I thought, well, I'm waiting. I am going to read a little bit of, A Miracle on 34th Street. So like I was saying, this man very much looks like Santa, real beard and everything. His name is Kris Kringle, shows up, and they had to fire their previous Santa from Macy's department store because let's just say he was not doing the best thing that he ought to be doing. You know what I mean? So this woman wanted to hire, she was a very businesswoman, you know, in the 40s, right, 50s, and had a single daughter, like a daughter too. So, she had a daughter. They was just them. It was an only child. So she was trying to raise her daughter to be very practical. So her daughter didn't believe in Santa because she told her not to believe in Santa. You've got to believe in Santa. Who doesn't believe in Santa? So, I believe in Santa. I'm Canadian. Santa's Canadian. Right? So we know each other, man. you know. So, anyway, that's why I thought I would read a little bit of it for you. So he ends up becoming the department store Santa. And this was a big deal. So, again, a little bit of Christmas history. When in the age of the glorious department stores, they would have Santas. I remember in Woodward's, which was a really very big, fancy department store like 50 years ago, they would have a Santa. And he would give you all kinds of things. Well, before they would give you candy, but then they stopped doing that, like suckers and stuff, because it was Christmas. But then, of course, they didn't want to mess with the kids' teeth, so they stopped doing that. And then they would give you apples, but who wants an apple from Santa, honestly? So then they started giving like little pins that said word words on them with Santa's face. Now that was a good gift. Or little toys and stuff, so they would do that too. So it was pretty cool. My God, Vancouver had a really nice Woodward's. Oh, I miss it. It's still there. They still use it. They just, I think it's got condos in it now or something. But anyway, it's called the Woodward's Building. You can look it up. And then there were other stores that actually had Santa. We have a Santa. He's pretty good. He's at our little mall, but he's not in any of the stores. He's actually out in sort of the main mall area, but he was really good. You know how some Santas are like, I don't know, He looks really good. And he waved to me because we know each other. Right on. So we're going to read this book. There are no pictures, but so there's just a picture on the front. And there's a bit of a picture on the back. There you go. See, Macy's? That's where it is. 34th Street and Broadway, because that's why they call it Miracle on 34th Street. Get it? That's what they're doing. Anyway, so he becomes the department store Santa. And then, hijinks ensue, actually, because of course, he believes himself to be Santa, and the little girl kind of believes him, and then there's all kinds of things. It's also kind of a romance movie because this guy really wants to date the woman, but she's very much power businesswoman, so she doesn't necessarily want to date him because, as we know, back in the day, the second she gets married, she's going to lose the job, and she doesn't want to lose the job because why would she want to lose the job? Because she's got a really good job. Right? At the Macy's. She's way up there. So let's read what happens. We're not going to read the first chapter because it picks up a little bit. And of course, most people have probably seen the movie, or maybe, both of the movies at least. So this is the story. This kind of, we're catching up where Fred, who is the man, wants to date the woman. So he's trying to, get in to see if there's ways he can date her. And so he takes, I believe, the little girl, named Susan. And he takes her to see Kris Kringle, because she'd never really seen him, because everybody is kind of talking about how he's just sort of the employee, right? Instead of being Santa Claus or Kris Kringle. So we're going to give it a go. Fred had a date to take little Susan out that afternoon, and still disturbed by her precociousness, because she's very smart and very able for like an 8-year-old or whatever she is, he was hatching a deep-dyed plot. He would take Susan to see new Santa Claus at Macy's. The gentleman would worm out of her a Christmas wish, and then Fred would arrange to have it under the tree. Perhaps then Susan might believe in Santa Claus, or at least begin to have some kind of normal childlike wonder. Fred managed to get Kris and enlist his aid, but when Susan reached the head of the line and Mr. Kringle took her on his lap, she refused to ask for anything. Whatever she wanted, her mother would get her, provided, of course, it wasn't too expensive. I mean, her mother does work at Macy's. She told Kris he was merely the kind gentleman her mother had employed that year to play the part of Santa Claus. You are better than most. said Susan. Anyway, your beard looks real. Mr. Kringle answered that it was real and that he was real too, but he could get nowhere with the child. Chris was baffled and troubled. This was just the sort of thing he feared was happening in the world. As luck would have it, Doris emerged from her office just as this was going on and started walking briskly toward the elevator. She glanced toward the dais, kind of the landing, the place where everybody was, and stopped dead. There was her daughter sitting on Santa Claus's lap. Fred saw her approaching and looked a little sheepish. There was no scene at all. Doris was brusque and definite. She quickly whisked Susan away from Chris and planted her in the office with a chair. Then she asked Fred to step inside. From her vantage point, Susan watched Chris as he took a little girl with golden pigtails upon his lap. Her foster mother was explaining to Chris that the child had only recently arrived from an orphanage in Holland, because, of course, they just had the Second World War. Right? Obviously, there were a lot of orphans then because of the big war. So she actually came to live in the U.S. and had a foster mother. And she was from Holland. She hardly spoke a word of English, but the wide-eyed child had insisted that Sinterklaas, which is what they call Santa Claus in Holland, as she called him, should speak Dutch. Because, of course, Santa speaks every language in the world. We know that he does because he's, magic. So he can do whatever he wants, right? He's eternal. Like we watched the other book movie combo, right? He's eternal, and, time is his to use, right? So that's how come he can travel the whole planet in one night, because he knows quantum mechanics, which is very good. And how to manipulate the space-time continuum, right? Moving right along. Okay, the girl was confidently talking away to Chris, and her mother's anguish was obvious. She started to explain to the girl, but Chris raised his hand for silence, and when the child had finished, she answered her in fluent Dutch. The sudden light which warmed the little Dutch girl's eyes did a funny thing to Susan. She stood there fascinated as Chris and the little girl happily sang a little Dutch Christmas song together. There was something very real about the Santa Claus, and it puzzled her considerably. Inside her office, Doris minced no words with Fred. She appreciated his interest and kindness toward her daughter, but Susan was her responsibility to bring up as she saw fit. Whether Fred agreed with her or not, she insisted that he respect her wishes regarding the child. Fred took the scolding he knew he deserved. He promised not to repeat the performance if Doris would let him go on being friends with Susan. Very contritely, he said goodnight to Susan and Doris and departed. As soon as Susan was alone with her mother, she began asking questions about Mr. Kringle. Doris carefully explained that he was just an employee of the store, like the doorman or the elevator man or anybody else. Again, back in the day, there were so many more people working than there are now in certain places. There were elevator men, right, that would actually go up and down, so you didn't have to do it yourself. It wasn't this whole self-serve everything. There were so many employees there. They would help you with anything. They would help you find everything. There wasn't like one cashier in the whole store. They probably had 5 or 6 different cashier places to go and pay for your things, so the lineups weren't very big. I can remember that, like 50 years ago when I was little and we were going to the big fancy stores. There were so many people there, and they helped you all the time. It was wonderful. Not like nowadays where you're walking around the whole store trying to find somebody to get you a size 8. and you're trying to find the one cashier that's like left open. Yeah, it wasn't like that. It was really good. And oh my God, did they decorate for Christmas? It was glorious. You waited all year to watch the beautiful Christmas windows displays. Woodward's put on the most amazing Christmas displays you've ever seen in your life. I remember going and watching them because we lived in Vancouver when I was little, although my grandmother lived in Surrey. And we would go to Woodward's and look at the beautiful windows. Man, you have no idea how amazing they were. You might still be able to see them, I think, in Christmas at Canada Place, because I think they still have them, if I remember rightly. At least they did before. They did before the pandemic. So maybe they still do. Okay. Yes, I know, said Susan. But when he started speaking Dutch to that little girl, Mother. Susan, I speak French, said Doris patiently. That doesn't make me Joan of Arc. Okay. Joan of Arc was this very famous kind of saint, right? And way back in France, and she was helping the people. They were having a war, and she was actually a woman warrior, which was very, very rare. So you could look it up. But Susan was not convinced. A shred of doubt still lingered in her mind. This Mr. Kringle had such a twinkle in his eyes. In order to clear up any confusion in her daughter's mind, Doris sent for Chris immediately. He entered with a jolly wink and a smile to Susan. You're an employee of this store, aren't you? She asked him. Chris nodded with mild surprise. And you're not Santa Claus, of course, because there really is no such person. Well, I am sorry to contradict you, Miss Walker, Chris replied, but there certainly is. And here I stand to prove it. Susan's eyes opened wide. Her mother looked quite annoyed. No, you don't understand, she said. I want you to be perfectly honest in front of the child. I am being perfectly honest, said Chris. Doris tried another tack. What is your name? She asked him. Chris Kringle. Doris pulled Chris's employment card from the file on her desk and suddenly stiffened. Is there anything more I could tell you? He was asking, but Miss Walker was really frightened now. No, thank you, she said hastily as she ushered Susan from the room. This man really believed he was Santa Claus. Oh my goodness, what do you guys think? Right? This gem she had found might be a dangerous character. He seemed kindly and innocent enough, but who knew what other manifestations he might show? And he was with the children all day long. It was a wonder that nothing serious had happened. She had just found out in time. Quietly but firmly, she gave Chris his notice. She wanted no trouble. She arranged to give him 2 weeks' pay. The old man didn't seem to mind. His only reaction seemed to be concern for Doris and little Susan. It was almost as if Doris was the one whose mental state was in question and to be pitied. As Mr. Kringle walked out of the door, the phone rang. Mr. Macy, now he was the head of the store, wished to see her immediately. Doris entered the Holy of Holies, which means it was kind of an allusion to, of course, way back in Jerusalem and, Jesus's time. But apparently the very big man's office, so that the head of the entire Macy's store. So Doris entered the Holy of Holies with fear and trepidation. Had Mr. Macy found out she hired the nut? And when she saw Mr. Shellhammer there as well, her heart skipped a couple of beats. To her amazement, Mr. Macy congratulated both of them. Already word had spread of Mr. Kringle's recommendations, and that had reached him. Mr. Macy was being flooded with wires. That's an old way of communication. Phone calls and messages of appreciation from grateful parents. This was the biggest goodwill idea that ever hit the store. Why, it was revolutionary. Macy's Santa recommending Gimbals. That's a competing store. It's kind of like Woodward's and Sears, maybe would have been. Simpson Sears back in the day. God, I miss Sears. Okay. Who misses Sears? I miss Sears. And Zellers. Don't get me started about Zellers. Oh my God, I miss Zellers too. Okay. If anybody else does, put it in the comments. Okay. The results were bound to be phenomenal. He intended to make it a policy throughout the store with the real Christmas spirit. I think another one. There was another store that had something like that in Canada. Goods satisfactory or money refunded. I am gonna cry. Okay, because we don't really have that anymore. Although Amazon's pretty good at taking stuff back, I gotta say. I mean, that's awesome. That's good. It was tremendous! A brand new departure in merchandising policy, and Macy's would reap the harvest of publicity and goodwill. They, by all means, must keep this Santa Claus. Perhaps they could even find him some other work to do after the holidays. Mr. Macy was delighted. He promised both Doris and Shellhammer immediate raises. Outside Mr. Macy's office, Doris shakily broke the news to Shellhammer. She just fired their wonderful Santa. The old man was definitely crazy. Mr. Shellhammer exploded. They must get him back at once before he left the store. If they didn't, all was lost. Doris said they could get another Santa Claus to carry out the same policy, but Mr. Macy had brought his own grandson to see Kringle that afternoon, Shellhammer told her. He had been tremendously impressed. They must get Kringle back at any cost. After a frantic search, Doris finally caught up with Chris at the service elevator. She told him that she had reconsidered and that he could still have the job. But to her dismay, Mr. Kringle politely declined. "I'm afraid I don't like your attitude," he said frankly, "nor Mr. Shellhammer's either." Frantically, Doris tried to explain that this genuinely helpfulness, his kindness, has created a sensation. "You must stay and keep spreading goodwill. Why, even Mr. Macy." Chris, however, was adamant. Mrs. Walker had clearly indicated her cynical disbelief, and that was enough for him. But when Doris broke down and told him the whole story and explained that if he left it would mean her job, Mr. Kringle's whole attitude changed. If that were the case, he said he would certainly stay. He couldn't have Mrs. Walker losing her job, not just before the holidays. "Think what it would mean to your lovely little daughter," he said. For Chris had begun to realize that Doris and little Susan were but unhappy products of the time. They represented and presented a real challenge to him, a sort of test case for Santa Claus. If he could win them over, well, if he could get them to believe in him, then there was still hope. If not, Santa Claus and all he stood for were through. "You know, Mrs. Walker," he said, "for the past 50 years or so, I've been more and more worried about Christmas. It seems we're all so busy trying to beat the other fellow and making things go faster and look shinier and cost less that Christmas and we're getting lost in the shuffle." "Oh, I don't think so," said Doris. "Christmas is still Christmas." "No," said Mr. Kringle, shaking his head. "Christmas isn't just a day, it's a frame of mind. That's what's been changing. That's why I'm glad I'm here, because maybe I can do something about it." In spite of herself, Doris was impressed by Chris's warmth and kindness. She couldn't help but liking the old man, even if he was a little off the beam. Okay, everybody. Woo! This is the story of the miracle on 34th Street. I highly recommend the book if you can get it, and I highly recommend both of the movies. It's such a good story, such a feel-good movie, And it's just going to get you in the spirit, because he is the spirit, right? So, everybody, I hope you have a wonderful Wednesday. No, wait, what day is it today, everybody? Thursday. Thursday evening. And I will see you again. Bye-bye.